All right, so we've created our nice smooth trail geometry from our cache particle sequence. And now we're just going to do a few more things just to prep our geometry, to color it and to do everything we need to do to get it ready to render. So what we're going to do is first I'm going to make a polyframe. And a polyframe is going to allow us to generate normals and up vectors. So let's turn off where it says normal name n. I actually want that off, and I want to turn on tangents and bitangents. And I have the tangent be n and the bitangent be up. So now if we turn on normals in the viewport, you can see that it actually generates normals down the length of the geometry. If I go to my visualizers and we turn on our up visualizer that we created before, you can see that now it's actually creating up vectors. It's technically the bitangent of the geometry, but you can think that it's just sort of perpendicular to those normals. So this is just a nice way to create some good attributes that we need to properly orient our final geometry. We're going to render this as curves in Mantra, and we need an attribute called orient to do that properly. And eventually we're going to turn that up attribute into an attribute called orient, which will make sure that we can control the orientation of the geometry when it goes to render. Okay, so let me turn off the up vectors. Let me turn off the normals there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to make an attribute called UMAP. And I use this a lot when I'm procedurally creating lines like this. And basically, it's an attribute that goes from 0 to 1 along the length of each of these strands. And similarly to the way that we use the color lookup, the 0 to 1, based on the n age and the particles, this is allowing us to basically look up any point along the length of a line and do various things to it. And in this situation, we're going to use it for color and alpha. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do another for each subnetwork. I like these for this. And I'm going to call this one create UMAP. And again, I'm going to make this green. And I'm going to make this driven by each primitive or point. We will go in there. And now off of the each node here, I'm going to do an attribute create. And the attribute we're going to create is called UMAP. Okay, and then this is going to be $PT. Oops, let me scroll down so that tooltip doesn't go over that. $PT divided by parenthesis, $NPT minus 1, close parenthesis. And what this does is this gives us a value from 0 to 1 across the points. So if I go to my geometry spreadsheet, you can see that we have an attribute now called UMAP that goes from 0 to 1, and it gradates across all 200, I believe, points that we have on each line. Okay, so now we have a lookup table that runs the length of the line. So make a null at the end of this. All right, so we've got our UMAP, create UMAP created. And so now what we want to do is I'm going to cache this out again because we cached our particles and now we're doing a bunch of different things to prep these lines. Some of them are slow, for example, this Carver network. And what we want to do, and I do this all the time along the way, is you basically do a waypoint cache when everything above that node, you've done it, you've figured it out, and you just want the speed and efficiency of having that stuff baked. So I'm going to grab our Dyn Particles 01 file cache. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it down here. I'm going to rename it because this isn't dynamics anymore. It's geometry. I'm going to call it geo. I'm going to call this trails 01. Okay, and so now I am going to write this out. So I'm going to hit save to disk. And as you can see, it'll take a few minutes to write out. And doing things like this along the way is really helpful because you can be able to iterate faster when you aren't cooking all this stuff up the chain that you don't need to cook anymore. And geometry like this is really light, right? So reading it off disk and scrubbing around is just nothing because this is a tiny amount of geometry. All right, it took about 5 minutes to cache out our GeoTrails. And so now let me turn the display flag on that node, and you can see we can now scrub that. It's really fast. Let me pull back and let's actually look at that geometry in action. So this is awesome. Now we can really start to see some pretty results of our GeoTrails. Actually, let me pull back here and let me turn on our object as well. So we can actually even start to see these trails in action with the object that they're sourcing from. Cool. All right, so next up what we're going to do is we're going to start to work on the actual styling of these lines to get our color and alpha values and move this towards being something that we're actually going to render.